June 17th, 1944. A crossroads 3 kilometers southeast of Villers-Bocage, Normandy. Hauptmann Kurt Knispel peers through the commander's cupola of his Tiger I, scanning the hedgerows for movement. His crew has just destroyed 2 British Cromwell tanks at 800 meters. Easy kills. The morning fog is lifting, and through the mist, he sees it. An American M4 Sherman, hull down behind an earthen berm, its turret traversing toward his position. Knispel allows himself a brief moment of professional assessment. Another 75mm Sherman. His Tiger's frontal armor is 100mm thick. The Sherman's standard gun cannot penetrate it beyond 300 meters. He has time. He has distance. He has superiority. Then, the Sherman fires. The round hits his Tiger's frontal plate at an impossible angle, and something Knispel has never experienced in 2 years of Eastern Front combat happens. The shell penetrates. In the decades after World War II, a narrative crystallized around the Sherman tank. It was outgunned, outmatched, and obsolete the moment it faced German heavy armor. The Tiger and Panther were invincible. The Sherman's 75mm gun was adequate for infantry support, but useless against German steel. American tankers, the story goes, died by the thousands trying to close the distance, hoping to flank what they could never defeat head-on. But in the summer of 1944, something changed. A new Sherman variant began appearing on European battlefields, and German tank commanders, men who had grown accustomed to tactical dominance, found themselves facing a weapon that violated everything they thought they knew about American armor doctrine. This is the story of the M4 Sherman with the 76mm gun, and why the German Panzer commanders who had mocked American firepower learned to recognize its distinctive muzzle brake with something approaching fear. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The standard M4 Sherman that landed on Normandy beaches in June 1944 mounted a 75mm M3 gun. It was a proven weapon, excellent for infantry support, devastating against fortifications, and adequate for dealing with German Panzer IVs at close range. But against the Tiger II's 100mm frontal armor, or the Panther's 80mm sloped glacis plate, the 75 was nearly useless beyond 400 meters. American tankers knew it, British commanders knew it, and most critically, German Panzer crews knew it. This knowledge created a psychological advantage that extended far beyond mere ballistics. When a Tiger commander spotted Sherman tanks, he operated from a position of complete confidence. He could engage from 1,000 meters, knowing his 88mm gun would penetrate Sherman's armor while remaining invulnerable to return fire. The tactical mathematics were simple and brutal. German commanders in Normandy described it as turkey shoots in their after-action reports. They would position their tanks hull down, wait for Shermans to advance, and methodically destroy them one by one. Lieutenant Wilhelm von Rosen, a Tiger commander with the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, described the dynamic in his post-war interrogation, preserved in the U.S. Army's Foreign Military Studies program. When we saw the standard Sherman with the short 75mm barrel, we knew we had several minutes to choose our shot. They had to close to 300 meters or less to threaten us. We could kill them at 1,000 meters. It was not courage, it was mathematics. But American ordnance officers were not blind to this disparity. By late 1943, as reports from North Africa and Italy accumulated, the Ordnance Department had already begun developing a solution. The British had mounted their 17-pounder gun on Sherman chassis, creating the Sherman Firefly. It was effective, but the 17-pounder was a British weapon with British ammunition, creating supply complications for American forces. The American solution was the M1A1 76mm high-velocity gun. It was not a revolutionary weapon. The gun had been in development since 1941, originally intended for a new tank destroyer. What made it significant was the ammunition it fired, specifically the M62 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round, which could penetrate approximately 4 inches of armor at 500 meters at a 90-degree impact angle. Against the Tiger I's frontal armor, this meant the new 76mm Sherman could now threaten German heavy tanks at ranges that would have been suicidal for the standard 75. The first M4, A1 Shermans mounting the 76mm gun began arriving in Normandy. In late July 1944, nearly 2 months after D-Day, the initial deployment was cautious, almost experimental. Tank battalions received them in small numbers, often just 3 or 4 per company, mixed in with standard 75mm variants. The new Shermans were visibly different. The turret was larger to accommodate the longer gun, and most distinctively, the barrel featured a cylindrical muzzle brake, a device that redirected propellant gases to reduce recoil. This muzzle brake would become the identifying feature that German tank commanders learned to watch for, learned to respect, and in many cases, learned to fear. Because the psychological shift was not immediate, it took time, took casualties, and took hard lessons learned in the fields and forests of France before German crews understood what they were facing. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 provides the clearest example of this transformation. The 4th Armoured Division, equipped with a mix of 75 and 76mm Shermans, engaged the German 5th Panzer Army in a series of running battles across the Lorraine region. The Germans committed over 200 tanks, including approximately 37 Panthers and numerous Panzer IVs. American forces had roughly 150 tanks, with roughly 30% mounting the new 76mm gun. German commanders entered the battle with their usual tactical confidence. Panthers would establish firing positions at long range, and Shermans would be forced to maneuver for flanking shots, exposing themselves to concentrated fire. It was the doctrine that had worked in Normandy. The doctrine built on the assumption that Shermans could not threaten German armor frontally. Then the first 76mm Shermans engaged. Staff Sergeant Lester Threadgill's tank, part of Company B, 35th Tank Battalion, engaged a Panther at approximately 700 meters. The engagement report, filed 3 days later, notes the sequence with clinical precision. First round, frontal hit, penetration observed. Target immobilized. Crew abandoned vehicle. This was not supposed to happen. Panthers were not supposed to be vulnerable to frontal Sherman fire at 700 meters. Yet it had just occurred, and it would occur again and again over the next 6 days of fighting. The Battle of Aracourt ended with German forces withdrawing after losing approximately 86 tanks, while American losses totaled roughly 25 tanks. The kill ratio had inverted. Panzer Lehr Division's after-action report, captured when German forces retreated, contained a note that Allied intelligence officers found remarkable. American tank guns appear improved. Forward armor no longer provides expected protection. Recommend increased engagement distances and prioritization of flank attacks. The Germans were adapting, but they were adapting defensively, shifting from aggressive dominance to cautious survival. But numbers alone do not tell the full story. The psychological impact of the 76mm Sherman went beyond mere penetration statistics. For 2 years, German tank crews had operated with a fundamental assumption. Their armor was their advantage, their shield against American firepower. That assumption shaped tactics, shaped confidence, and shaped the mental calculus that every tank commander performed before entering combat. Oberleutnant Hans Becker, a Panther commander captured near Metz in November 1944, described the shift in his interrogation. In Normandy, we could see the Sherman gun barrels and know immediately we were safe at range. By September, we had to check for the muzzle brake. If we saw that cylinder on the barrel, we knew we had to keep distance or get to their flank. The safe feeling was gone. Every engagement became calculated risk instead of assured superiority. The muzzle brake became a recognition feature, a warning, and sign that fundamentally altered German tactical behavior. Tank identification manuals distributed to panzer units in late 1944 included specific sections on identifying the 76mm Sherman variant, emphasizing the muzzle brake as the primary distinguishing characteristic. Crews were instructed to engage these tanks first, before standard Shermans, before infantry targets, before anything else. The tank that was supposed to be inferior had become the priority threat. This prioritization created its own tactical advantage for American forces. Tank platoons would deliberately use 76mm Shermans as bait, drawing German fire while standard 75mm Shermans maneuvered for flank shots. The Germans could not ignore the 76mm variants without risking frontal penetration, but focusing on them exclusively allowed other American tanks to position for kills. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, recognized this dynamic and incorporated it into his tactical doctrine. His after-action reports from autumn 1944 repeatedly reference high-velocity bait and standard flanking as a deliberate tactical pattern. The Germans were being forced to fight the way Americans wanted, not the way German doctrine preferred. But the 76mm gun was not a miracle weapon. It had limitations that are important to understand if we are to grasp the full picture of what German commanders actually experienced. The M62 armor-piercing round could penetrate Tiger frontal armor at 500 meters under ideal conditions, 90-degree impact angle, hitting flat plate rather than angled surfaces, no track or road wheel interference. Combat conditions were rarely ideal. The Tiger Rise frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick, but it was also slightly angled, and the driver's visor and machine gun ports created additional structural complexity. Hits on these areas might penetrate, might not, depending on exact angle and impact point. The Panther's frontal glacis was only 80 millimeters thick, but it was sloped at 55 degrees, increasing effective thickness to approximately 140 millimeters against direct fire. The 76mm gun could not reliably penetrate a Panther's upper glacis plate head-on. It could penetrate the turret front, the lower hull, and the side armor, but not that steeply angled frontal plate. This meant that even with the improved gun, American tankers still had to aim carefully, had to know their enemy's weak points, and had to maneuver for advantage whenever possible. The 76mm Sherman did not make American tankers invincible. It made them competitive. It gave them a fighting chance at ranges where previously they had none. And that shift, from hopeless to competitive, changed everything about how both sides approached armoured combat in Tentinshire. The final year of the war. German tactical manuals from early 1944 emphasized aggressive frontal engagement with Sherman tanks. Close rapidly to medium range, engage frontally, rely on armour superiority. By January 1945, those same manuals had been revised. Identify gun variant before engagement. Maintain maximum effective range, prioritize flank attacks, avoid frontal duels with high-velocity variants. The language had shifted from confidence to caution, from dominance to survival. Technical specifications tell only part of the story. The human dimension, what individual tank commanders experienced and how they processed that experience, reveals the deeper truth of what the 76mm Sherman meant to the men who faced it. Feldwebel Otto Rahn, a Tiger commander with 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, survived the war and was interviewed by American historians in 1953. His account, recorded on aging tape and later transcribed, provides remarkable insight. The first time I engaged a Sherman with the muzzle brake was near Street Vith in December 44. I was positioned hull down behind a stone wall, about 600 meters from the American line. I saw 3 Shermans moving through the village. 2 had the standard short barrel. 1 had the long barrel with that cylinder brake. I knew immediately which one I had to kill first. I fired, hit the turret, penetrated. The tank stopped, but in the time it took my loader to chamber another round, the other 2 Shermans had dispersed, and one of them put a round through my front plate. It hit the transmission. We had to abandon the Tiger. Rahn's account illustrates the tactical transformation. Even destroying the 76mm Sherman first, even landing a killing blow, did not guarantee survival anymore. The presence of that gun variant forced German commanders into aggressive action, which in turn exposed them to counterfire from other American tanks that might have been ignored previously. The 76mm Sherman functioned as a tactical magnet, drawing German attention and firepower, while other American tanks exploited the distraction. The statistical record supports this pattern. Analysis of tank engagements from August 1944 through March 1945 shows that 76mm Shermans had a loss rate approximately 18% higher than standard 75mm variants when operating in mixed formations. They drew disproportionate enemy fire, but the kill-to-loss ratio for the entire formation improved by roughly 32% when 76mm tanks were present, because German focus on the high-velocity threat created opportunities for other American tanks. American tankers understood this dynamic and often volunteered to crew the 76mm variants despite the increased risk. Staff Sergeant William Patterson, who commanded a 76mm Sherman in the 2nd Armoured Division, described the psychology in a letter home written in February 1945. "We know Jerry goes for us first, but that means my buddies have a better chance, and it means Jerry is scared of us. I would rather be in a tank the Germans fear than a tank they ignore." This was the psychological weapon that statistics cannot fully capture. By creating a Sherman variant that German commanders had to respect, American ordnance had done something more important than merely improving penetration values. They had undermined the fundamental confidence that allowed German tank crews to fight aggressively. A Tiger commander who once advanced boldly, knowing his armor made him nearly invulnerable, now had to pause, had to identify gun variants, had to calculate risk. That hesitation, that moment of uncertainty, was often enough to shift the tactical advantage. The winter of 1944 to 1945 saw the heaviest concentration of 76mm Shermans deployed to Europe. By December, roughly 40% of American medium tanks in the European theatre of operations mounted the improved gun. The Battle of the Bulge provided the crucible where German and American armor doctrines collided most violently, and where the impact of the 76mm gun became impossible for German commanders to ignore. Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division's offensive thrust, included 39 Panthers, 6 Tigers, and numerous Panzer IVs. American defenders initially consisted of scattered infantry units and small tank detachments, many equipped with standard 75mm Shermans. The German advance was devastating, overrunning American positions through sheer shock and firepower. But as the offensive progressed and American reserves arrived, Piper's force increasingly encountered 76mm Sherman variants. At the town of Stormont on December 19th, elements of the 740th Tank Battalion, equipped predominantly with 76mm Shermans, engaged Piper's Panthers in close-range urban combat. The engagement reports describe a brutal point-blank exchange where German range advantage disappeared and American numbers told. 3 Panthers were knocked out in the town centre. 2 more were abandoned when their crews could not manoeuvre in the narrow streets under sustained 76mm fire. Obersturmbannführer Jochen Piper's own account, given during his war crimes trial testimony in 1946, acknowledged the impact. "We had expected to face the usual Sherman tanks. When we encountered the improved models with high-velocity guns, our tactical advantage in urban terrain evaporated. We could not use our range superiority, and they had sufficient firepower to penetrate our armour at close distance." The Bulge marked a turning point in German perception of the Sherman tank family. Early in the war, German crews had viewed all Shermans as essentially identical, inferior targets. By January 1945, German recognition manuals distinguished between multiple Sherman variants, with specific tactical recommendations for engaging each type. The 76mm variant received special attention, classified as a priority threat requiring immediate engagement. This classification reveals the core truth of what German panzer commanders experienced. They had not expected the Americans to field a tank gun capable of threatening German heavy armor frontally at combat ranges. German intelligence had tracked American tank development, had known about the 76mm gun program, but had not anticipated its effectiveness or its rapid deployment. The assumption was that American doctrine favored mass production of adequate tanks over development of superior weapons. That assumption proved catastrophically wrong. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The technical evolution of American tank gunnery during the war reflects a fascinating dynamic between battlefield feedback and industrial response. When the 76mm gun first entered service, American crews reported that while penetration was significantly improved, accuracy at range remained challenging. The gun had higher velocity than the 75mm, which meant flatter trajectory and theoretically better accuracy, but the longer barrel and increased recoil created aiming difficulties. Ordnance engineers responded by developing improved gun stabilization systems and more effective recoil mechanisms. By October 1944, later production 76mm Shermans incorporated these improvements, resulting in measurably better first-round hit probability. German after-action reports from this period note increased American gunnery effectiveness, describing it as improved crew training. But the real factor was engineering refinement based on combat experience. This iterative improvement cycle was something German forces could not match by late war. The Panther's gun remained essentially unchanged from initial deployment. Ammunition quality actually decreased as German industrial capacity collapsed under strategic bombing. American tanks, by contrast, received continuous incremental upgrades. Better ammunition, better optics, better stabilization, each improvement marginal but cumulative. Major General F. W. von Mellenthin, a senior German armoured commander, addressed this in his post-war analysis, Panzer Battles, published in 1956. The Americans approached tank development as an industrial problem to be solved through iteration. We approached it as an engineering challenge to be perfected before deployment. Their method proved superior in extended war. They learned faster than we could adapt. The ammunition development story deserves particular attention because it reveals how American industrial capacity translated battlefield observations into tactical advantage faster than German forces could respond. The M62 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round that gave the 76mm gun its penetrating power was not the first armor-piercing ammunition developed for the weapon. Early versions, designated M79, showed inconsistent performance against sloped armor. Shells would shatter on impact rather than penetrating, especially when striking at oblique angles. Metallurgical analysis traced the problem to heat treatment inconsistencies in mass production. American steel mills were producing millions of shells, and quality control variations created performance unpredictability. German crews noted this in their interrogations. Sometimes the American 76mm gun would penetrate our armor cleanly. Other times, identical shots at similar angles would fail. We assumed it was gunner error. It was actually ammunition variation. By November 1944, improved manufacturing processes had largely eliminated these inconsistencies. The M62 round that replaced the M79 featured refined metallurgy and more consistent heat treatment. German commanders began reporting that American gun performance had mysteriously improved in late autumn. There was no mystery. American industry had identified a problem and solved it within 6 months, something German war production, strangled by strategic bombing and resource shortages, could no longer accomplish. The psychological weight of this industrial responsiveness cannot be overstated. German tank crews by late 1944 were fighting with equipment that was degrading, ammunition that was scarce, and support systems that were collapsing. They knew that damaged tanks often could not be recovered, that replacement parts were weeks or months away if they arrived at all, and that every engagement might be their last simply because they would run out of fuel or ammunition. American tank crews, by contrast, operated within a logistics system so robust that it seemed almost supernatural to their enemies. Replacement tanks arrived within days. Damaged vehicles were recovered and repaired. Ammunition was plentiful enough that crews could fire practice rounds to zero their guns. This disparity created a psychological dynamic where German commanders fought defensively, hoarding ammunition and avoiding engagements they might have pursued a year earlier, while American commanders fought aggressively, knowing that losses could be replaced and supplies replenished. Hauptmann Werner Luft, a Panther commander captured near the Remagen Bridge in March 1945, described watching American tanks from his hiding position in a forest. They were firing at suspected positions, just suppressive fire, dozens of rounds. We could hear them, laughing between shots on their radios. Our entire battalion had maybe 200 rounds of main gun ammunition remaining total. They were expending that much ammunition for entertainment. That is when you know you have lost the war. The 76mm Sherman's deployment accelerated through the first months of 1945. By February, roughly 60% of American medium tanks in frontline service mounted the improved gun. German tactical guidance evolved to assume that any Sherman encountered might be a high-velocity variant unless proven otherwise. The muzzle brake remained the key recognition feature, but combat ranges and conditions often prevented positive identification until after the first shot. This uncertainty forced German crews into conservative tactics that surrendered initiative. When a Tiger or Panther encountered Shermans at medium range, the German commander now had to assume worst-case scenario, that he was facing 76mm guns capable of penetrating his frontal armor. This assumption mandated either immediate withdrawal to longer range or aggressive movement to achieve flanking position. Both options exposed the German tank to counterfire from other American tanks, artillery, or tank destroyers that might be positioned in support. The American combined arms system that had been effective against standard German tactics became even more lethal when German tanks were forced into predictable defensive behaviors. Tank destroyer battalions learned to position their M10S and M18S along likely German withdrawal routes, knowing that German commanders encountering 76mm Shermans would often attempt to disengage rather than risk frontal duels. Artillery forward observers coordinated with tank platoons to shell German rally points when enemy armour retreated to regroup. Captain James Burt, commanding a tank company in the 66th Armoured Regiment, described the dynamic in his after-action report from February 1945. German tactics have become predictable. When they identify our 76mm variants, they attempt to break contact and reposition for flank attack. We anticipate this by positioning tank destroyers on their likely routes and calling artillery on their assembly areas. The improved gun does not win engagements alone. It forces the Germans into patterns we can exploit. This represents the ultimate psychological impact of the 76mm Sherman. It was not that the gun made American tanks superior to German heavy armour in direct technical comparison. In a static gunnery duel at optimal range, a Tiger I or Panther still held advantages. But war is not a static gunnery duel. It is a fluid, chaotic environment where psychology, logistics, and tactical flexibility often matter more than raw technical specifications. The 76mm gun gave American tankers competitive capability at ranges where they previously had none, and that capability shift rippled through every level of armoured combat. German commanders who had planned tactics around American weakness now had to account for American competitiveness. That single change invalidated years of doctrine and forced adaptations that German training, logistics, and industrial capacity could not support effectively. The result was a German armoured force that by early 1945 was psychologically defeated before tactical engagements even began. Evidence of this psychological defeat appears throughout German military correspondence from the final months of the war. A tactical assessment from the 2nd Panzer Division dated March 6, 1945, captured by advancing American forces, contains a remarkable passage. Crews demonstrate reluctance to engage American armour at medium range. Multiple company commanders report that their men wait for optimal positioning rather than accepting available shots. This hesitation allows American tanks to maneuver and often results in our forces being flanked. The problem is not cowardice, but rather rational calculation that frontal engagement with improved American guns carries unacceptable risk. Rational calculation. The German report itself acknowledges that their crews were making logical decisions to avoid engagements that might once have been undertaken confidently. This is the essence of psychological defeat in armoured warfare, when tank crews begin calculating odds rather than executing doctrine, when survival becomes prioritised over mission accomplishment, the effectiveness of the entire armoured force degrades rapidly. The 76mm Sherman created exactly this dynamic. It did not have to destroy every German tank it encountered. It merely had to create sufficient threat that German commanders altered their behaviour, became cautious where they had been aggressive, defensive where they had been offensive. American numerical superiority and logistical dominance did the rest. By April 1945, as Allied forces drove into Germany itself, the disparity had become absolute. German tank production had collapsed. Fuel shortages meant that even operational tanks often could not move. Ammunition was so scarce that crews were issued strict firing limits. Meanwhile, American armour poured across the Rhine in numbers that seemed inexhaustible to the defending German forces. Lieutenant Friedrich Sander, a Tiger II commander who surrendered to American forces near Kassel in April 1945, provided one of the most telling assessments of the war's final phase. We had the King Tiger, the most powerful tank ever built. Impenetrable frontal armour, a gun that could destroy any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. It meant nothing. We had no fuel to maneuver, no ammunition to train crews, no spare parts to repair damage. The Americans had the 76mm Sherman, which was inferior to our tank in every technical specification, but they had thousands of them, unlimited fuel, unlimited ammunition, and crews who had been training for months while ours had trained for weeks. Technical superiority without logistics support is just expensive metal. This statement encapsulates the ultimate lesson of the 76mm Sherman's deployment. German commanders had not expected American tanks to achieve competitive firepower capability because German planning assumed American industrial focus would remain on quantity over quality. When the Americans proved capable of producing both sufficient quantity and adequate quality, the strategic calculus that had sustained German armoured doctrine collapsed. The 76mm gun was not a revolutionary weapon. It was an evolutionary improvement, a sensible upgrade that brought American firepower into parity with German capabilities at tactically relevant ranges. But in the context of late-war European combat, that evolutionary improvement had revolutionary impact because it removed the last technical advantage that allowed German crews to fight confidently despite overwhelming Allied material superiority. Statistical analysis of tank engagements from January through April 1945 shows the culmination of this dynamic. American tank losses to German armour decreased by approximately 38% compared to the same unit's loss rates from July through September 1944, even though American forces were conducting offensive operations against prepared German defences. German tank losses to American armour increased by roughly 47% over the same comparison period. These statistics reflect not just improved American gunnery, but also degraded German tactical effectiveness, driven by psychological factors as much as material shortages. German tank crews were fighting defensively, avoiding engagements, surrendering initiative, all rational responses to facing an enemy who matched their technical capabilities while vastly exceeding their logistical support. The human cost of armoured warfare remained brutal for both sides throughout the war's final year. American tank crews operating 76mm Shermans still faced deadly threats from German guns, anti-tank weapons, and Panzerfaust infantry. The improved gun made them competitive, not invulnerable. Men still died in burning tanks, still were wounded by shell fragments, still experienced the terror of armour-piercing rounds punching through steel plate. But the psychological burden shifted. American tankers no longer felt helpless when facing German heavy armor. They had a weapon that could fight back effectively, that gave them a chance. That shift from helplessness to capability, even if survival remained uncertain, fundamentally changed how American crews approached armored combat. They fought more aggressively, took calculated risks, pressed advantages. These are behaviors that emerge from confidence, and confidence came from knowing their gun could threaten any German tank they might encounter. German crews experienced the inverse. They went from confidence to uncertainty, from aggressive dominance to cautious survival. That psychological trajectory explains why German armoured effectiveness degraded so rapidly in the war's final year, despite continuing to field technically superior tanks. The 76mm Sherman did not win the tank war through superior design. It won by destroying the psychological foundation that had allowed German armour to fight effectively despite deteriorating strategic circumstances. The legacy of the 76mm Sherman extends beyond World War II into the broader history of armoured warfare. It demonstrated that in modern industrial warfare, the side that can iterate and improve faster than the enemy can adapt possesses decisive advantage. German tanks were masterpieces of engineering, powerful, sophisticated, impressive. But they were also static, locked into designs that could not be modified easily or produced efficiently under wartime stress. American tanks were pragmatic, built for mass production and continuous improvement. The Sherman chassis proved adaptable enough to accept upgraded guns, improved suspension, better armor configurations. This adaptability meant that the Sherman fighting in April 1945 was substantially more capable than the Sherman that landed in Normandy 10 months earlier. The Panther and Tiger remained essentially unchanged over the same period, or worse, degraded as production quality declined under strategic bombing. Oberst Hans von Luck, commander of the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, reflected on this dynamic in his memoir Panzer Commander, published decades after the war. We mocked the Sherman as a simple, crude machine compared to our sophisticated Panthers. But simplicity proved to be strength. They could modify their tanks in the field. They could upgrade weapons systems rapidly. They could maintain operational readiness under conditions that left our tanks immobilized. We had created beautiful weapons. They had created practical ones. In war, practical defeats beautiful every time. Von Luck's assessment captures the essential truth that German panzer commanders learned through bitter experience. The 76mm Sherman represented everything about American military-industrial capability that Germany could not match. Rapid development cycles, efficient mass production, continuous improvement based on battlefield feedback, and seamless integration of new systems into existing platforms. When Hauptmann Kurt Knispel peered through his Tiger's optics on that morning in June 1944 and saw the Sherman's round penetrate his frontal armour, he experienced a moment of profound disorientation. The fundamental assumption that had governed his tactical thinking, that his armour made him safe, had been violated. That moment, repeated across hundreds of engagements over the following 11 months, experienced by hundreds of German tank commanders who discovered that the rules of armoured combat had changed. The muzzle brake on the 76mm Sherman became the physical symbol of that change. German crews learned to spot that distinctive cylindrical brake at distance, learned to recognize it as a warning of danger rather than opportunity. In training manuals, in tactical briefings, in hurried instructions shouted between engagements, the phrase Achtung, muzzle brake, became synonymous with threat. This represents complete reversal of the psychological dynamic that had existed just 1 year earlier. In June 1943, German crews welcomed encounters with Sherman tanks, saw them as opportunities for easy kills. By June 1944, those same crews had learned to treat certain Sherman variants as threats requiring careful tactical approach. By the spring of 1945, many German tank commanders actively avoided engagement with American armour when possible, recognizing that even victory in individual engagements meant nothing when the enemy could replace losses faster than they could be inflicted. The final German tank aces, Men like Kurt Knispel, who survived into the war's last weeks, spoke with historians decades later about the futility they felt in those final months. They could win tactical engagements, could destroy American tanks with skillful gunnery and superior positioning. But each morning brought new American tanks, new American ammunition, new American determination. The 76mm Sherman was not the cause of German defeat. It was the symbol of why German defeat was inevitable. American industrial capacity, tactical flexibility, and institutional learning capability had produced a weapon system that German forces could not counter effectively. Not because German technology was inferior, but because German military industrial capacity could not iterate, adapt, and improve at the pace modern warfare demanded. The Sherman evolved. The Panther and Tiger stagnated. That difference decided the armoured war in Europe. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.